Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks. The snowstorm arrived like an ambush. 1 minute, the sky was just gray and heavy. The next, it was a swirling, chaotic mess of white. By morning, the world outside the cabin wasn't just covered. It was swallowed whole, blanketed in a silence so thick it was almost suffocating. You know the kind of quiet I mean, right? Where it feels like the snow is pressing down on everything, muting even your own thoughts. Standing at the window, I could barely make out the shapes of the trees through the endless flurry. It was disorienting, like the whole preserve had been erased and replaced with nothingness. Fiona was already up, holding her coffee like it was the only thing keeping her tethered. She stared out the window, her face drawn and serious. It was the kind of look that makes you pause, even when you think you've got things under control. "Jake," she said finally, her voice soft but edged with something sharp. "This isn't just a storm. I can feel it. Something's not right." I smiled at her, more to reassure her than because I actually felt calm. "It's just snow, Fiona. Big storm, sure, but nothing I can't handle." I kissed her on the forehead, hoping that would ease the crease between her brows. "I just need to check the shelters. Make sure no one's stranded out there. I'll be back before you know it." She wasn't buying it. Her grip on her mug tightened, and her eyes locked onto mine. "You always say that. You always say you'll be back soon." I could have argued, maybe even teased her a little to lighten the mood, but something in her tone made me hesitate. "I'll be careful," I promised, forcing a grin. But as I zipped up my parka and stepped out into the storm, I couldn't shake the way she'd looked at me, like she knew something I didn't. The wind hit me like a freight train the second I stepped outside. It howled through the trees, whipping snow into my face and cutting through my layers like they weren't even there. The trail to Raven's Crest was already buried. The familiar path had transformed into a blank canvas of white. Every step was an effort, my boots sinking deeper into the drifts as the snow kept falling, relentless and heavy. The forest, usually so full of life, even in the dead of winter, felt wrong. You know that eerie feeling when everything's too quiet? That's what it was like. No birds, no rustling branches, not even the faint scurrying of animals. Just the wind and the crunch of my boots, which seemed to get swallowed up by the storm almost as soon as they sounded. About halfway to the shelter, I stopped. At first, I couldn't put my finger on what had me on edge. Then it hit me. The silence. The kind that makes your skin crawl, like the world's holding its breath. I stood there for a moment, squinting into the swirling snow, my breath puffing out in quick, misty clouds. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They came out of nowhere, a single set cutting cleanly through the snow, leading off the main trail and into the dense trees. Fresh ones, too, sharp-edged and crisp like they'd just been made. My stomach twisted. No one should have been out here in this storm. No one. I should have turned back, reported it on the radio. But you know how it is. Curiosity has this way of overriding good sense. Against my better judgment, I found myself stepping off the trail, following those footprints. The tracks led me to a cabin. Not one of the preserved shelters, though. This was something else entirely. The thing looked ancient, like it had been sitting there for decades, hidden from the world. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow and ice, and the windows were so frosted over that they seemed opaque. But here's the thing. I know every inch of this preserve, every shelter, every outpost, every clearing. This cabin wasn't supposed to exist. I hesitated, staring at it. The logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn around, but my feet kept moving. The footprints ended right at the door, which was hanging slightly open, just enough to reveal a dusting of snow inside. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, even to me, swallowed up by the storm. Nothing. I stepped inside, the wooden floor groaning under my boots. The air hit me like a wall. Cold? Yes, but also thick, heavy in a way I couldn't quite explain. A table lay overturned in the center of the room, its legs snapped clean off. The faint smell of smoke hung in the air, like a fire had burned out not long ago. And then there was the blood. It was smeared across the floor in dark, frozen streaks, leading to a trapdoor in the corner. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. But instead, I knelt down, my gloves brushing against the icy wood as I pried the trapdoor open. The smell hit me first. Sharp, metallic, and acrid. I pointed my flashlight into the darkness, the beam flickering as it lit up a narrow staircase. "Is someone down there?" I called, my voice shaking. For a moment there was nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of scraping. Slow, deliberate, like nails dragging against stone. My hands were trembling as I started down the stairs. At the bottom, the space opened up into a small, damp chamber. The air was freezing, each breath hanging in the air like smoke. In the middle of the room was a wooden chair, its back to me. Ropes dangled from the arms and legs, frayed at the ends. Scattered around the floor were papers. Dozens of them. They were covered in strange symbols and diagrams. Circles, jagged lines, things that didn't make any sense but somehow felt wrong, just to look at. I picked one up, turning it over in my hands when I heard it. Leave. The word was barely a whisper, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the room. Nothing. Leave. The voice came again, louder this time, overlapping with another, and another, until it wasn't a whisper at all but a chorus of voices, desperate and furious. I bolted for the stairs, but the trapdoor slammed shut above me. The flashlight flickered wildly, and I swear I saw shadows moving, shifting unnaturally, along the walls. And then I saw it. A figure, impossibly tall, standing just beyond the reach of my light. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and piercing. The air grew even colder, frost spreading across the walls as it raised a hand. "You shouldn't have come," it said, its voice low and resonant, like the groan of ancient ice. The trapdoor creaked open again, and I didn't think. I just ran. Up the stairs, through the cabin, out into the storm. The snow was blinding, the wind cutting into my face, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. By the time I reached the ranger station, the storm had started to ease. Fiona was waiting, her face pale and tight with worry. "Jake, where the hell were you?" I was about to call in a search team. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck. Finally, I managed to say, "There's a cabin, out past Raven's Crest. There's something there." She stared at me, her expression shifting from worry to something colder. "Jake, Raven's Crest burned down 20 years ago. There's nothing out there." I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The storm passed, leaving the preserve sparkling under a fresh layer of snow. The next morning, I led a team back to the spot. There was nothing. No cabin, no footprints, no blood, just an empty clearing. I left the preserve not long after. Even now, on cold winter nights when the wind howls, I swear I can still hear those whispers. And I wonder if I escaped, or if it just decided to let me go. If you'd told me a few years ago that what started as a casual hiking trip with my two best friends would end up being one of the most nerve-wracking, mind-bending experiences of my life, I would have laughed in your face. I mean, come on. A little weekend hike in February? What could possibly go wrong? Plenty, apparently. More than I'd ever imagined. But hindsight's a funny thing, isn't it? If I'd known then what I know now, I would have stayed home, buried under a pile of blankets, watching Netflix and laughing at Jake and Matt's misadventures from a safe, warm distance. But no, I let myself get talked into it. Jake was the first to bring it up, his face lighting up like a kid on Christmas morning as he waved a hiking map in front of us. 3 days, 20 miles, Bramblewood Forest. He grinned from ear to ear. "We'll camp, we'll hike, we'll unplug for a bit. It'll be great." Matt chimed in, always the adventurer of the group. "It's the perfect time of year," he said. "Fewer people, cool weather, no bugs. What's not to love?" I should have pointed out the obvious. February. Cool weather? More like freezing. No bugs? Sure. But also no sunlight, no warmth, and as it turned out, no sense of safety. The first day lulled me into a false sense of security. We set off early, our boots crunching over frost-covered grass as we made our way through farmland that stretched on for miles. Jake and Matt kept up their usual back-and-forth banter, mostly centered around who had packed better gear. Jake had brought everything but the kitchen sink, a multi-tool, extra layers, a first aid kit big enough to stock a small hospital. Matt, on the other hand, had opted for a minimalist approach, carrying only the essentials. Essentials apparently didn't include extra socks, which Jake made sure to point out at least a dozen times. By the time we reached the edge of the forest, the sky had turned a dull gray, and the air had a bite to it. The towering trees loomed overhead, their branches bare and skeletal against the darkening sky. We set up camp just inside the tree line, finding a relatively flat spot under a cluster of evergreens. Dinner was a sad affair. Instant noodles cooked on a tiny camping stove, washed down with lukewarm water. but we were too tired to care. That night, though, that night was a different story. The wind picked up as soon as we crawled into our sleeping bags. It howled through the trees, rattling the tent and making it feel like we were in the middle of a storm. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me, but it didn't help. The cold seeped through every layer, chilling me to the bone. Sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, the wind would shake the tent again, and I'd jolt awake, my heart pounding. When morning finally came, I was sure things could only improve. Boy, was I wrong. We woke to snow. At first, it wasn't bad. Light, fluffy flakes floated gently down, dusting the ground in white. But by the time we packed up camp, the storm had taken a turn. The snow came faster and thicker, whipping sideways in the wind and obscuring everything around us. Trails disappeared. The forest became a maze of snow-covered trees, every direction looking the same. Jake and Matt, already cranky from the sleepless night, started snapping at each other almost immediately. "You should have brought proper boots," Matt muttered, kicking at the snow clinging to his cheap hiking shoes. Jake shot back, "At least I didn't forget half my gear. Who hikes without spare socks?" I stayed out of it, too focused on putting one foot in front of the other to waste energy on arguing. Every step felt heavier. The snow pulled up my boots and soaked through my pants. The cold was relentless, biting at my fingers and toes, even through my gloves and thick socks. By mid-afternoon, I was beginning to think we'd never find our way out. Then, like a mirage, the buildings appeared. There were two of them, nestled in a small clearing. One was barely standing, its roof caved in and walls crumbling. The other was intact, a sturdy stone bothy with a wooden door and small windows that glowed faintly in the dim light. Relief flooded through me. Shelter. Finally. Inside, the bothy was sparse but dry. A small fireplace sat against one wall, and there was a table and a few old mats on the floor. It wasn't much, but compared to another night in the storm, it felt like paradise. Jake and I set about gathering wood for a fire, while Matt, ever the curious one, decided to explore the ruined building next door. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he called over his shoulder, disappearing into the snow. Minutes passed. Then more. No Matt. I was about to go after him when I heard it. Barking. At first it was faint, muffled by the storm. Then it grew louder, sharper, and more insistent. I stepped outside, squinting into the white haze, and saw them. A man and his dog. The man was stocky, bundled in layers of tattered coats, with a knitted cap pulled low over his face. His dog was massive, a snarling beast of muscle and fur that strained against its leash. "What you doing out here?" the man asked, his voice rough and gravelly. I stammered something about hiking and finding the bothy. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Bothy's for anyone," he said, "but you shouldn't be out in weather like this." Just then, Matt reappeared, brushing snow off his jacket. The man's gaze snapped to him, sharp and assessing. Something about the way he looked at Matt made my stomach twist. "Name's Roy," the man said suddenly. His tone was casual, but there was something off about it, like he was trying too hard to sound friendly. "You staying here tonight?" I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to be cautious. "Just passing through," I said quickly. Roy smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was thin and tight, more of a sneer than anything else. "Storm like this," he said softly, "makes people do strange things." Jake shifted uncomfortably, but Matt, never one to back down, snapped, "What's that supposed to mean?" Roy didn't answer. He just looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Ever been stuck somewhere you couldn't leave?" he asked. A chill ran down my spine. I shook my head. Roy's smile widened. "Does funny things to your mind?" That was all I needed to hear. "We should go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've got a long way to go." Roy didn't try to stop us, but his dog growled as we packed up and left. As we trudged back into the storm, I could feel his eyes on us watching. We hadn't gone far when the barking returned, louder this time. Closer. My heart sank. He was following us. We ran. The snow was knee-deep, and every step felt like wading through quicksand, but we didn't stop. When we reached a stream, wide and fast-moving, we didn't hesitate. The icy water bit into my legs, dragging at my clothes, but we forced our way across. When I turned back, Roy and his dog were on the far bank. The dog barked furiously, its breath fogging in the air, but Roy didn't move. He just stood there, watching, his face obscured by the storm. We didn't stop until we found a road. A passing truck picked us up and we called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. No crime, they said. Just a strange man in the woods. Even now, years later, Roy's words haunt me. Does funny things to your mind. I wonder if he was talking about himself or about us. You know how sometimes you look back at a moment in your life and think, what was I even doing? That is exactly how I feel about the night we went to Greywood Asylum. Honestly, none of us should have been there. We all had this nagging feeling in the back of our minds that we were making a mistake. Somehow, none of us said it out loud. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe we were just plain stupid. Whatever it was, it led us into that storm and straight into the heart of something we will never fully understand. The blizzard hit harder than any of us expected. Snow was coming down in thick, relentless sheets. The wind was alive. It was not just cold. It had this sharp, almost personal bite, like it wanted to push us back. The asylum was barely visible through the whiteout, just a jagged silhouette looming in the distance. Each step felt heavier than the last. The snow was pulling at us, trying to keep us away. My scarf was wrapped so tight around my face that it was hard to breathe. I was not about to stop. None of us were. We're idiots, Zoe muttered. Her words were muffled by her scarf. She held her flashlight in a death grip, her fingers trembling even through her gloves. Complete idiots. Parker, ever the fearless leader of our little expedition, did not even look back. Speak for yourself, he said, adjusting the strap of his camera. His voice was steady, but I could tell he was tense. He had that determined look he always got when he was chasing a story, like nothing in the world could stop him, not even common sense. The gate came into view first. It was this hulking, rusted monstrosity wrapped in vines that were frozen stiff under layers of ice. Chains held it shut, their edges jagged with rust, like they had been broken and then frozen into place over the years. Parker was the first to grab hold of the gate, pulling at it with all his strength. The chains groaned, protesting like they did not want to give way. Eventually they did. The sound of them snapping was deafening. This sharp, metallic clang seemed to echo unnaturally loud, like the storm itself had stopped to listen. Mia stepped through first, her flashlight beam cutting through the swirling snow. Come on, she called, glancing back at the rest of us. It's freezing out here. No one needed convincing. The cold was unbearable, and the storm was only getting worse. I followed Mia through the gate, my boots crunching against the ice-covered ground. The asylum loomed ahead of us, a massive, crumbling structure that seemed to watch us approach. Its walls were covered in ivy, frozen mid-creep, and the shattered windows stared down at us like hollow eyes. Even in the dark, with snow whipping through the air, you could feel it. This presence, like the building itself, was alive and waiting. Cal, always the skeptic, stopped just short of the entrance. Remind me why we're doing this again, he asked, shaking the snow from his hood. Eliza, Parker said simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way it did. Eliza's story was the thread that had pulled us all here. Decades ago, on a night just like this, she had vanished. Some people said she had escaped the asylum, fleeing its cruelty. Others whispered darker rumors, stories of revenge, madness, and something far worse. Parker had become obsessed with her story, spending weeks digging through archives and piecing together fragments of the past. Somehow, he had convinced the rest of us to come along on his wild chase for answers. Standing there in the shadow of Greywood Asylum, I wondered if we had made a terrible mistake. The front door hung open. Its hinges were rusted and sagging like the mouth of a tired beast. Stepping inside was like walking into another world. The air was thick, heavy, and freezing, even colder than it was outside. Dust covered everything, clinging to broken furniture and shattered glass. The walls were peeling in long, jagged strips, and graffiti covered every surface. Strange symbols, words scrawled in an uneven hand, things that did not make sense. God, Zoe whispered. Her flashlight swept over a wheelchair, tipped on its side. This place is worse than I imagined. Exactly what I hoped for, Parker said, snapping a photo with his camera. His grin was the kind that made you wonder if he was enjoying this a little too much. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The storm faded into the background, replaced by a silence so deep it felt like the building was holding its breath. Every hallway was the same. Long stretches of decay and darkness, broken up by rusted bed frames, scattered patient files, and graffiti that looked more like warnings than art. It was eerie, wrong, Like we were not just walking through an abandoned building but stepping into someone's memories. Memories they had tried to bury. And then the whisper started. At first I thought it was just the wind sneaking through cracks in the walls, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It was soft, almost a chant, and it seemed to follow us, darting from shadow to shadow. Zoe was the first to notice, stopping abruptly and gripping my arm. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded, though I did not want to admit it. The others turned, their faces tense. No one wanted to be the first to say what we were all thinking. "It's just the wind," Parker said finally, his voice tight. "Come on, let's keep moving." We reached the isolation ward a few minutes later. Its door was slightly ajar, revealing a room bathed in an unnatural, bluish light. The moment we stepped inside, the air changed. It was thicker, heavier, pressing down on us like an invisible weight. The walls were covered in drawings, faded but detailed enough to make out. Figures twisted in agony, storms swallowing entire landscapes, and at the center of it all, a girl. Her face was calm, blank, but somehow more haunting because of it. "Eliza," Parker whispered, stepping closer to one of the drawings. It showed her standing in a snowstorm, her eyes wide and empty. "Do you think she drew these?" Mia asked, her voice shaking. Before Parker could answer, the wind roared back to life. It slammed against the building, rattling the walls and sending icy gusts howling through the room. The temperature dropped sharply, our breath turning to frost in the air. Then the door slammed shut behind us. The whispers grew louder, rising to a deafening crescendo. My flashlight flickered, casting wild shadows that twisted and stretched unnaturally. And then I saw it, the drawing of Eliza. Her face moved, her eyes locked onto mine. In that moment, I felt something cold and ancient pass through me. "Open the door," Mia screamed. Panic was in her voice. "I'm trying," Cal shouted. His hands fumbled with the handle. And then the whispers stopped. From the far corner of the room came a voice, soft, steady. "Leave." A girl stepped out of the shadows. Her dark hair was tangled. Her eyes were hollow but burning with something I cannot explain. Frost spread across the walls, crackling as it moved, and the temperature dropped even further. The air was so cold, it felt like it was slicing into my lungs. "Leave," she said again. Her voice was heavy with sorrow and command. We did not wait. Cal and Parker forced the door open, and we ran. The whispers chased us, wrapping around us like a living thing, the hallways twisting and shifting as if the asylum itself did not want to let us go. Somewhere in the chaos, we lost Zoe. I screamed her name, spinning around, but she was gone. When we finally made it outside, the storm swallowed us whole. We kept running, lungs burning, legs shaking, until we were far enough away to feel the air lighten. But Zoe did not make it out. In the days that followed, none of us talked about what happened. We did not talk about the whispers, the girl, or the cold. But sometimes late at night I still hear her voice. And I know, deep down, that she is not done with us. That place is not done with us. Not yet. You know those storms the news hypes up for days? The kind where they slap dramatic names on them and say things like historic blizzard or life-threatening conditions. This was one of those. By the time the first flake started falling, the city had already gone into full panic mode. Shelves were cleared of bread, milk, and all the random things people hoard when they think the world's ending. I wasn't worried about groceries, though. I had other things on my mind. By mid-afternoon, the storm had turned ferocious. I stood by the window in my tiny apartment, watching as the snow piled higher and higher. It swallowed the streets below. The city I knew so well was disappearing. It was replaced by this eerie white void. The wind roared like a living thing, rattling the glass so hard I half wondered if it would shatter. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. It was waiting for something to happen. And honestly, so was I. I should have been curled up on the couch, binge-watching something mindless or scrolling through my phone like everyone else. But that wasn't in the cards for me. Not that night. Not with what I'd uncovered. See, I'm Morgan. I'm an investigative journalist, not the glamorous kind, but the kind who spends hours chasing obscure leads and staring at blurry screenshots until my eyes cross. If there's a mystery to solve, I'll find it. Or it'll find me. That's how I ended up neck deep in the spiral. If you haven't heard of it, good, that means you've been spared. It's this dark website, equal parts urban legend and waking nightmare. People whisper about it on forums and Reddit threads, They claim it's connected to disappearances, murders, maybe even worse. Most people brush it off as internet nonsense, but not me. Not after the trail of breadcrumbs I've been following for weeks. By the time the storm hit, my apartment looked like a scene out of a true crime documentary. Every surface was covered in photos, printouts, scribbled notes connected by string. It was chaos, sure, but it was my chaos. And at the center of it all was the spiral. What I'd uncovered so far was horrifying enough, but I knew I was only scratching the surface. The final piece had come in the form of a flash drive. It was handed to me a week earlier by an informant who called himself Cipher. I didn't know much about him, just that he was deep into the dark web and scared out of his mind. He'd given me the drive in some hole-in-the-wall cafe. His hands shook as he slid it across the table. "You're in their sights now," he'd said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Be careful," and that should have been enough to make me back off. Instead, it only made me more determined. So while the storm raged outside, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop and finally plugged in the drive. The files on that thing, I don't even know how to describe them. There were videos, chat logs, profiles of victims. It was like staring into a black hole of humanity's worst impulses. The more I dug, the worse it got. The spiral wasn't just a website. It was a cult, a sick, twisted community that turned murder into performance art. Every act was meticulously planned, with victims chosen like they were casting roles in some depraved play. And the audience? They weren't just passive viewers. They were participants, feeding the cult's twisted rituals with their sickening enthusiasm. I couldn't stop scrolling. Every file was another punch to the gut, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. By the time I looked up, my head was spinning. I was starting to question if I'd ever feel clean again after what I'd seen. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take any more, a notification popped up on my screen. Next event. Tonight, 10 p.m. My heart stopped. The clock in the corner of my laptop read 9:38. It was happening now. Part of me wanted to shut it all down, pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't, if this was real. And I knew it was. I had to see it. I had to know what was about to happen. The site loaded slowly, like it was daring me to back out. The screen was black, except for the ever-spinning spiral at its center. A live chat filled the side of the screen. Messages poured in faster than I could read them. Here we go. Can't wait to see what they've cooked up tonight. Who's the guest star? My stomach turned. The countdown hit 0, and the stream began. The first thing I saw was a room. Dark, cold, lifeless. It looked like an abandoned warehouse. The kind of place where nothing good ever happens. Snow drifted in through cracks in the walls. It swirled like ghostly fingers. In the middle of the room was a man tied to a chair. His breath fogged the air. Each exhale was shaky and desperate. He struggled against his bonds, but it was no use. Then they appeared. The figure stepped into the frame, moving with an eerie calm. They wore a crude, hand-carved mask. The spiral etched into it seemed to twist and shift with the flickering light. In one gloved hand, they held a knife. Its blade was long and impossibly sharp. The chat exploded. "Do it. Make it last. Let's see something special." I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And then just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the figure turned. Slowly, deliberately, they looked directly at the camera. Directly at me. "We see you, Morgan," they said. The voice was distorted, but the words were clear as day. I froze. My brain couldn't process what I'd just heard. My hands fumbled for the mouse, trying to close the window, but nothing worked. The feed stayed up, and their voice cut through the static again. "You've been watching us. Now it's your turn." The screen went black. Then a new message appeared. "Look outside." My heart felt like it had stopped beating. Slowly, as if moving any faster would shatter me, I turned to the window. At first, all I saw was the storm. Snow swirled in the wind like a living thing. But then, out of the white, a figure emerged. They wore the same mask. The spiral was painted in bright red across their chest. They raised a hand and pointed. At me. My phone buzzed on the desk. The sound made me jump out of my skin. A message from Cipher. "Run. Now." I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed the flash drive, my laptop, and my bag, threw on my coat and bolted. The power was out. It left the hallway in pitch darkness. My boots crunched against the carpet as I sprinted for the stairs. Every sound was amplified by my own terror. When I hit the street, the storm swallowed me whole. The wind slammed into me. It nearly knocked me off my feet, and the snow blinded me as I stumbled forward. I didn't know where I was going, just away. I ended up in a park. I crouched behind a monument, trying to catch my breath. The air burned in my lungs. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I peeked around the edge of the monument, and there they were. The masked figure. They moved through the storm like it didn't touch them. They were holding something in their hand. A rope, coiled tight like a predator waiting to strike. Morgan. They called. The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the wind like a knife. Before I could move, red and blue lights flashed in the distance. Sirens wailed, growing louder. The figure froze. They turned toward the lights. And then, just like that, they vanished into the storm. I stumbled toward the police car, practically collapsing against the side as an officer rolled down the window. "Take this," I gasped, shoving the flash drive at them. "They're killing people. Streaming it. It's all on here." The storm eased by morning, but the nightmare was far from over. The files on that drive sparked a nationwide investigation. Raids, arrests, headlines everywhere. But the spiral didn't die. It scattered. It slipped back into the shadows. Weeks later, I got one last message from Cypher Node. "The spiral never truly ends, but you made them afraid. Stay sharp." Even now, I check every lock twice. Triple check the shadows in my apartment. The storm might be over, but its chill still lingers. And if the spiral resurfaces, I'll be waiting, or at least I'll try to be. The storm didn't just arrive, it attacked. One minute, I was sitting by the window at the Willow Ridge Inn, watching the leafless trees sway against a dull gray sky. The next moment, they were gone. Just gone. Snow came crashing down like a curtain, so thick and fast that it was impossible to tell where the earth ended and the sky began. Dad stood at the doorway, grinning like this was some grand adventure. A proper snowstorm, he declared, brushing his hands together as if we were characters in some frontier novel. He even gave us a wink. That was supposed to make us feel better. It didn't. The wind outside wasn't just strong, it was wild. It screamed and howled, slamming against the walls like it wanted to get in. Every few minutes, a sharp bang rattled the old windows, making the whole house shudder. The snow kept piling up, drifting higher and higher until the bottom half of the windows was completely blocked. We'd only moved here 2 weeks earlier, and already I was regretting it. My parents had sold our cramped city apartment, determined to make their dream of running a bed and breakfast come true. They'd fallen head over heels for the inn's charm the moment they saw it. They called it a diamond in the rough and kept talking about starting fresh. To me, the inn didn't feel charming. It felt off. It wasn't like in the movies where you step into a haunted house and the walls groan ominously. It was quieter than that, subtle. The air inside felt heavy, like it was watching and waiting. The silence was the worst part. It was thick and oppressive, like even the house itself didn't want to speak. By the time the storm rolled in, it was like the inn had turned on us, trapping us inside its walls. The nearest town, Ridgeline, was 20 miles away. In this weather, we might as well have been on Mars. The heater wheezed and sputtered, barely doing its job, while the fireplaces were more decorative than functional. Eli, my little brother, sat by the one working fire, hunched over his sketchbook. Normally, Eli was this human hurricane of energy, always bouncing between questions, jokes, and weird trivia. Now, he was unnervingly quiet. His pencil scratched against the paper in slow, deliberate strokes. "What are you working on?" I asked, more out of boredom than curiosity. He snapped the sketchbook shut so fast I flinched. "Nothing," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "Come on, let me see." I teased, reaching for it. No, his voice cracked, and he hugged the book to his chest like it was a lifeline. Then, softer, he added, "It's just something." "Something, huh?" I leaned back, trying to play it cool. "All right, Picasso, keep your secrets." He glanced at the window, his brows knitting together. "There's something out there," he whispered. I rolled my eyes. "What, Bigfoot?" His lips pressed into a thin line, and he didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the swirling snow outside. His expression was so serious that it made my stomach twist. That night, the power went out. We scrambled to light candles, digging through drawers and boxes for anything that might help. The generator, our supposed backup plan, spluttered to life for all of 3 minutes before dying with a sad, metallic groan. Dad swore under his breath, kicking it like that might resurrect it. Mom tried to keep things cheerful, as she always did. "It's just like camping," she said brightly, handing out blankets. But there was a tightness around her eyes that gave her away. The candles made everything worse. Their flickering light threw long, shifting shadows across the walls, making the inn feel even more alive. Every creak of the floorboards and every groan of the old pipes seemed amplified in the dark. I lay in bed, listening to the wind scream outside, the blankets pulled up to my chin. I told myself it was just a storm, nothing to be afraid of. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. And then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft at first, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. Steady. Insistent. I sat up, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound was coming from the window. For a long moment, I just sat there, frozen. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to pull the covers over my head and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But curiosity or stupidity got the better of me. I slid out of bed and crept to the window. The glass was fogged with frost, but I could still make out a shadowy figure standing just beyond the driveway. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its silhouette too sharp to be a trick of the light. I stared, my breath fogging up the glass. For a second, I thought it might be a tree or one of those optical illusions people talk about. But then it moved. Just a slight tilt of the head, like it was looking right at me. I don't remember running to my parents' room, but suddenly I was there, pounding on the door and yelling, "There's someone outside." Dad grabbed a flashlight and checked the windows while Mom tried to calm me down. By the time we all looked, the figure was gone. "It's just the storm," Dad said, pulling the curtains closed. "The wind's playing tricks on your eyes." Eli didn't buy it. He grabbed my hand, his voice trembling as he whispered, "It's here. It's watching us." The next morning, the storm had only gotten worse. Snow had completely buried the front porch, and the back door wouldn't budge, no matter how hard Dad pushed. We were trapped. Eli wouldn't leave my side, clinging to me like a shadow. He wasn't his usual self, not even close. He was pale, quiet, and jumpy, like he was waiting for something to happen. At some point, I found him sitting by the fire again, staring at his sketchbook. I didn't ask permission this time. I grabbed it and flipped through the pages. My stomach dropped. Page after page was filled with the same figure, tall, thin, and inhumanly still. Its eyes were always glowing, like hot embers in a dying fire. And in every drawing it was closer to the inn. "Eli," I whispered, my hands shaking. "Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to scare you." He said, his voice barely audible. That night the tapping came back, but it wasn't just one window this time. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed through the whole inn, coming from every wall, every door, every window. Dad stomped around with his flashlight, muttering about branches and loose shutters. Mom tried to act calm, but her hands shook as she stoked the fire. Then, the tapping stopped. For a moment, the silence was almost worse. And then came the knock. Slow, heavy, final. Dad opened the front door before we could stop him, and the cold rushed in like a living thing. Standing in the snow, just a few feet away, was the figure from Eli's drawings. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to stand still. We spent the rest of the night in the cellar, huddled together under blankets. The footsteps overhead were slow and deliberate, pacing from room to room like it was searching for something or someone. Eli clung to me, whispering, "It doesn't want us here. It's happened before." When the footsteps finally stopped, none of us dared to move for hours. When we emerged, the storm was gone. Outside, the snow was covered in footprints, dozens of them, leading away from the inn and disappearing into the woods. We packed up that same day. No one argued. We didn't even look back until we were miles down the road. But when I finally did glance in the rearview mirror, I saw it. The figure was standing at the edge of the woods, watching us leave. Its eyes weren't angry, though. They almost looked sad. I turned away, shivering. Deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Whatever it wasn't bound to the inn. It would follow, waiting for the next storm, and we'd be next. Have you ever ignored every red flag the universe threw at you, thinking, this'll be fine. Only to realize you've walked straight into a disaster? That was me a few years ago, driving through the worst snowstorm I'd ever seen. Even now, I can't believe I convinced myself it was a good idea. The day had started off innocently enough. Finals were around the corner. I'd holed up in the library all afternoon, surrounded by crumpled notes and half-empty coffee cups. There's something oddly comforting about studying in a crowded library. The quiet hum of activity, the soft tap of fingers on keyboards, whispered conversations. It's like being alone but not really alone. That was exactly what I needed after a week of feeling cooped up in my dorm. The storm had started while I was inside, but I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just a little snow, maybe some wind. But by the time I packed up my things and stepped outside, the world was already unrecognizable. Snow blanketed everything, falling in thick, swirling waves that seemed to come from every direction at once. The air was icy and sharp. The sky had that eerie, dull glow you only get during storms. I should have turned back. Every part of me told me to go back inside, to wait it out. But the idea of spending the night at the library, curled up in a chair with my bag as a pillow, sounded even worse than braving the storm. It's not that far, I told myself. You'll be fine. Spoiler alert, I was not fine. The second I pulled onto the road, I knew I'd made a huge mistake. The snow wasn't just falling, it was attacking. The wind whipped it into these furious spirals that danced across the road, making it impossible to tell where the pavement ended and the ditch began. My car's headlights barely cut through the storm. They cast weak, flickering beams that only illuminated the chaos ahead. I cranked the heater up as far as it would go, but it felt like a losing battle. The cold seeped in through every crack, biting at my hands and face. My breath fogged the air, no matter how high I turned the heat. My fingers were so tight around the steering wheel that they started to ache. The road was a nightmare. Every curve, every dip felt like a trap waiting to spring. The tires slid on patches of black ice I couldn't see, sending my heart into my throat each time. The storm howled around me, rattling the car like it was trying to tear it apart. Then, just as I was about to take a particularly sharp turn, I saw him. At first, I thought he was a shadow, something my eyes had conjured up out of exhaustion and nerves. But as I got closer, the figure became clearer. A man standing on the side of the road, his arm raised in a weak attempt to flag me down. I panicked, slamming on the brakes harder than I meant to. The car skidded, tires screeching against the ice, before finally coming to a stop a few feet away from him. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst right out of my chest. For a moment, I just sat there staring. He didn't move, didn't wave or call out, just stood there, hunched against the wind, snow plastered all over him like he'd been out there for hours. Everything in me screamed, keep driving. I wanted to. I wanted to hit the gas and get the hell out of there. But then another thought crept in. What if he was in real trouble? What if I just left him there to freeze to death? I rolled down the window just enough for my voice to carry over the storm. Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride? He nodded, stepping closer. As he moved into the beam of my headlights, I got my first good look at him. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with sharp features and these piercing eyes that seemed way too calm for the situation. His coat looked old and worn. The kind of thing that might have been warm once but wouldn't stand a chance against a storm like this. Snow melted on his face, leaving thin, glistening trails that almost looked like tears. Please, he said, his voice steady but quiet. I'm trying to get to the university. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the wheel. Every instinct told me to drive away, but the way he stood there, so calm and still, sent a shiver down my spine. Finally, I unlocked the door. Thanks, he said as he climbed in, bringing a blast of freezing air with him. He buckled his seatbelt like this was the most normal thing in the world, while I sat there trying to steady my breathing. No problem, I said, forcing a weak smile as I eased the car back onto the road. What were you doing out here in this mess? Research, he said simply. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, but he didn't elaborate. His tone didn't exactly invite follow-up questions, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Instead, I introduced myself. I'm Katie, by the way. Elliot, he replied, his gaze fixed straight ahead. We drove in silence for a while, the storm outside growing worse by the minute. Snow piled up on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. The tires slipped every few minutes, each time sending a jolt of panic through me. Elliot sat quietly beside me, his hands resting tensely on his knees. You go to the university? I asked, more to break the silence than anything else. Yeah, he said. History major. Cool. I'm in archaeology, I said, hoping to find some common ground. I guess we're sort of in the same field. He gave me a faint smile, but it didn't last long. Yeah, kind of. The silence returned, heavier this time. Even the storm seemed louder. The wind screamed like it was trying to drown out anything we might have said. Then, out of nowhere, Elliot spoke again. "This road," he said quietly. "It's dangerous in storms like this." "No kidding," I muttered, trying to keep the mood light. "I feel like I'm on ice road truckers." He didn't laugh. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes darker than before. "Have you heard about the crash?" I frowned. "What crash?" "It happened years ago," he said. "A car full of students got caught in a storm, just like this one. They went off the road. No one found them until spring." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Oh," I said weakly. "I think I heard about that. Isn't it one of those urban legends people tell on campus?" "It's not a legend," he said sharply. "I knew them." My breath caught. "You knew them?" He nodded, his jaw tightening. "They were my friends. We were supposed to drive back together that night, but I stayed behind. I thought the storm would pass. It didn't." His words hung heavy in the air, sinking into my chest like a weight. "They called for help," he continued, his voice hollow. "Begged for it, but no one came. The storm buried them. Buried everything." I didn't know what to say. The pain in his voice was raw, like an open wound. "Elliot," I said softly, "you couldn't have." "I should have been there," he snapped, his voice cracking. Then, just as quickly, he slumped in his seat, his shoulders trembling. "Maybe I could have done something. Maybe they wouldn't have died alone." The storm outside seemed to howl louder, the wind rattling the car like it was alive. My heart ached for him, but I didn't know how to help. Before I could think of anything to say, Elliot leaned forward suddenly, his eyes locked on something in the distance. "Stop the car," he said. "What?" "Why? Just stop." I hit the brakes, the tires skidding slightly as the car came to a halt. Elliot was out the door before I could ask what was happening. "Elliot, wait," I called, scrambling after him. He was at the side of the road, brushing snow away from something half buried in the drift. As I got closer, I realized what it was. A rusted, twisted piece of metal. "Oh my God," I whispered. "It's their car," he said, his voice hollow. "This is where they went off the road." The wind roared around us, and for a moment I swore I heard faint whispers. Desperate, pleading. My blood ran cold. "Elliot, we have to go," I urged. He turned to me, his face pale and otherworldly. "They're still here," he murmured. "They're waiting." And then, just like that, he was gone. The storm swallowed him whole. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like hours before stumbling back to the car. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, lost in the snow, searching for his friends. Every time I drive that road, I swear I hear whispers carried on the wind, calling for help that will never come. You ever have one of those days that starts bad and just keeps getting worse? That was this day for me. It had been snowing since before sunrise. One of those storms that doesn't just coat the ground, it swallows the world whole. By noon, the sky was a solid sheet of gray. By the time I left work, the snow was knee-deep, the kind that clings to your boots and drags you down with every step. It felt like walking through quicksand. Except, freezing. I had to tilt my head down to keep the wind from whipping snow into my face. It was brutal, sharp, icy, and relentless. Even with my scarf wrapped tightly, little stings of cold managed to sneak through. The streets were deserted, which made sense. Only an idiot would be out in this. That idiot was me. The world was eerily quiet, except for the storm. No cars, no distant hum of activity. Just the crunch of my boots and the relentless whistle of the wind. It was the kind of silence that seeps into your bones, the kind that makes you feel alone even in a crowded place. By the time my house came into view, it barely looked like itself. Just a hazy outline under layers of snow, like a memory fading at the edges. I practically stumbled up the steps, my legs burning from the effort, and fumbled with the keys. The moment I stepped inside, I expected relief, warmth, safety. Instead, I was greeted by a strange, heavy stillness. The power was out, which wasn't surprising given the storm. The flickering candlelight cast long, distorted shadows across the walls. I should have felt comforted by the familiarity of home, but something felt off. It's hard to explain, but when a place like the back of your hand feels different, like you've stepped into someone else's version of it? That's how it felt. I shook it off as best I could. Kicking off my boots, I left them in a soggy heap by the door and hung up my coat. The wet fabric was cold against my hands. My jeans were soaked from trudging through the snow, and I could feel the chill clinging to my skin. I headed straight for the kitchen, craving something hot, tea, soup, anything to thaw me out. The thermos of hot water I'd prepped that morning was still warm. Thankfully, I poured a cup, letting the steam curl up and warm my face. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. But it didn't go away. If anything, the quiet made it worse. The storm outside was raging. Sure. But inside? Inside it was too quiet. like the house itself was waiting for something. Then I heard it, a faint thud. I froze. The cup hovered inches from my lips. The sound was muffled, almost drowned out by the wind, but it was there. My mind immediately went to logical explanations. Maybe something fell over in the wind. Maybe the snow on the roof shifted. But then it came again, louder this time, unmistakably from upstairs. I set the cup down slowly, my fingers gripping the counter to steady myself. "Hello?" I called out. My voice broke the fragile quiet. Nothing. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive. My heart started pounding, each beat echoing in my ears. I told myself I was being ridiculous. No one could have gotten in. The doors were locked. The windows were shut. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter. Its cold, solid weight was oddly comforting. I headed toward the stairs. Every creak of the old wood beneath my feet felt like it was giving me away, as though someone or something was listening. By the time I reached the top, I was holding my breath. The hallway stretched ahead of me, the doors to each room slightly ajar. That wasn't right. I always closed them before leaving. Always. My grip on the flashlight tightened as I moved forward, the beam cutting through the shadows. The thud came again, this time from the bedroom. "Who's there?" I called out. I tried and failed to keep my voice steady. No answer. I took a deep breath, trying to summon some courage, and pushed the door open. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Mostly. The bed was made. The curtains were drawn. The faint glow of a candle cast flickering light across the walls. But the closet door, that was wrong. It was open just a crack, enough to show darkness beyond. I knew with absolute certainty that I'd closed it that morning. I stepped closer, my stomach churning with every inch. "If someone's in there," I said. My voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to come out." My hand trembled as I reached for the door. The flashlight beam wavered. I flung the door open. Nothing. Just shadows. A few coats hung limply on their hangers, swaying slightly as if mocking my fear. I let out a shaky breath, my shoulders sagging with relief. But as I turned to leave, I heard it. A whisper. It was soft, almost lost beneath the storm, but unmistakable. My name. I spun around, my heart racing. The closet was empty. I knew it was. But the whisper came again. This time it wasn't coming from the closet. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, the flashlight beam sweeping across the room. And that's when I saw her. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, standing barefoot on the wooden floor. Her hair was a mess, tangled with bits of ice. Her pale face was streaked with dirt. She wore a thin, fluttery dress, completely wrong for the freezing weather. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold. Wide, unblinking, filled with something I couldn't quite name. Fear? Sadness? Both? "Help me," she whispered. Her voice trembled. I took a step back, my mind racing. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "The storm brought me," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I can't go home." Her words didn't make sense. But there was something in her voice that made me pause. Despite the fear crawling up my spine, I felt an overwhelming urge to help her. "All right," I said cautiously. "Let's figure this out. Where's home?" Her gaze shifted to the stairs. "It's in the attic," she said simply. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "The attic?" She didn't answer. She was already heading for the stairs. I followed her, though every step felt heavier than the last. The storm outside seemed to rage louder as we climbed, the wind howling like a living thing. At the top, the attic door loomed ahead, its hinges rusted and warped. The girl pushed it open without hesitation. Inside, the attic was bitterly cold. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ice. Snowflakes drifted in through a shattered window, swirling like tiny ghosts in the pale light. She pointed to an old chest in the corner, its lid slightly ajar. I moved toward it, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around and leave. But I didn't. Kneeling by the chest, I peered inside. At first it seemed empty, just shadows pooling at the bottom. But then I saw it. A locket, small and tarnished, lying there like it had been waiting for me. The moment I picked it up, the air in the attic changed. The shadows grew darker, thicker, pressing in from all sides. "Put it back," the girl whispered urgently. Her voice was sharp with fear. "What?" I asked. I stood quickly. "Isn't this what you needed?" "No," she said. Her eyes were wide. "You shouldn't have touched it. They're coming." The shadows began to move, writhing along the walls and floor like living things. A low growl echoed through the attic, a sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. "Run," the girl screamed. Her voice pierced the chaos. We bolted down the stairs. The shadows surged after us like an inky tide. Back in the living room, she turned to me. Her face was pale but determined. "You have to destroy it," she said. She pointed to the locket in my hand. How? I demanded. Panic rose in my chest. Fire, she said simply. Without thinking, I threw the locket into the fireplace. The flames roared to life, devouring the locket as the shadows recoiled, shrieking and dissolving into nothing. The storm outside died instantly. The wind silenced as if it had never been there. When I turned to thank the girl, she was gone. The only sign she'd been there was a trail of small, wet footprints leading to the now closed window. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. But every time I think about it, I feel the cold creeping back in. A chill no fire can chase away. Don't forget to check out these videos. Thanks for watching.